That's more like it. Ed Stafford truly succeeded after 3 days without food and 9 missed meals. On a deserted island, Ed Stafford came across a male goat stuck in a tree branch. Not only did this move make him famous in the survival world, but he also got to enjoy a roasted goat leg, crispy outside, tender inside. He caught an authentic coconut crab weighing 8.8 kilograms. Effortlessly achieved protein freedom, a famous figure in the wild survival scene. This time, Ed Stafford will challenge himself to survive alone on a deserted island. Not just for 2 days, and not 2 months either, but for a full 60 days, considering that this trip might be one he wouldn't return from. Before setting out, he specifically asked a doctor for a full health checkup. After confirming that all his health metrics were fine, Ed Stafford boarded the small yacht rented by the production crew to depart. Still the familiar move of stripping completely. Only bringing a few cameras, he headed toward the beach. Watching the crew leave quickly without looking back, Ed Stafford was suddenly flooded with emotions. You have to understand, he didn't even bring a single strand of hair. Surviving 2 months barehanded is no joke. After arriving on the island, he calmed himself, adjusted the cameras he brought, then began planning basic survival. As everyone knows, the most lacking resource on a deserted island is fresh water. So Ed Stafford focused his gaze on the coconut trees along the shore. He turned around and used a rock to knock a few down. Shaking them with his hands, there was a decent amount of water inside. So he targeted the reef nearby and applied some physical force. And in 2.5 minutes, he successfully enjoyed some coconut water. Tasting the sweetness of the coconut made Ed Stafford unable to stop. He directly plucked 5 or 6 more down in one go. Could this be the legendary dreamlike beginning? Simply filling his belly, he grabbed his suitcase and started looking for shelter. Truly speak of the devil. He hadn't walked far along the beach, and Ed luckily discovered a cave. In both size and length, it was a perfect fit. I've got a cave to stay in now. Ha ha ha. With a strange burst of laughter, Ed Stafford picked up his suitcase and moved into his new home. As for dinner, he just had some crispy coconut meat. As night began to fall, Ed Stafford used dry grass as a blanket and peacefully made it through his first night. The next morning, no sooner had he gotten out of bed than he rushed to the beach, planning to collect some snails from the shore for breakfast. Compared to coconut water, these could provide a decent amount of protein. While Ed Stafford picked sea snails, here's some good news. However, due to the lack of fire support, Ed Stafford could only use rocks to smash and enjoy sashimi. According to his daily calorie intake of 3,000, he would need to eat at least a few hundred snails to meet his daily needs. However, to be cautious, Ed Stafford still had to restrain himself. Right now, the most important task was still to find a water source. Suddenly, there seemed to be movement on the cliff ahead. There was fresh water slowly trickling down from it. Below it had formed a small puddle. This made Ed Stafford extremely excited. He turned around and immediately pressed his bald head to it. The feeling of drinking fresh water again was truly refreshing. Then he cleaned up each small puddle thoroughly. He wouldn't need to worry about water later. Thinking about staying naked all the time might not be very proper. So Ed Stafford went to the beach to collect some dry grass. Quickly made himself a wild JK outfit. Wearing clothes again, it seemed like he regained his confidence. Living by the beach meant strong waves and wind. He had to collect some palm leaves to line the cave. On the way, he even discovered a small gecko laying eggs. For Ed Stafford, who had been starving for 2 days, it was like food delivered to his mouth. Living by the beach meant strong waves and wind. As he chewed, his stomach's internal organs immediately reacted. Although the taste was a bit hard to swallow, Ed Stafford had to grit his teeth and force it down. Of course, that bit of meat surely wasn't enough to fill even a gap in his teeth. To fill his stomach, he again gathered a bowl full of small snails. And just like that, he barely made it through the second night. Time passed quickly to the third day. To avoid wasting even a single drop of water, Ed Stafford used the seashells he had found as water containers. That way, if it rained, there would be plenty of fresh water to drink. Then, he used the rope he had collected to make a water conduit, funneling fresh water from the cliff into a bottle. However, just as Ed Stafford was exploring deeper into the island, he suddenly discovered a herd of wild mountain goats in the forest. As everyone knows, having mountain goats on an island isn't unusual. But at this point, he hadn't even resolved the 3 most basic survival factors, so Ed Stafford could only watch them run away helplessly. During his search, he also found charcoal left behind by locals who had visited the island. This stuff is an excellent cleaning agent. Ed Stafford used it to thoroughly brush his dentures. Reaching the highest point to observe the terrain, the surrounding landscape made him feel relaxed. He returned to the campsite and began organizing the next tasks. Time passed quickly to the 5th day. The water conduit he had set up earlier was now filled with a bottle of water. This made Ed Stafford smirk with satisfaction. It seemed like it was time to start collecting materials for a campfire. Using a rock to cut a branch and tying bark onto it, he quickly made a bow. But there was no machete in hand to help. Even handling a piece of wood was this difficult. It took ages to split it down the middle using a rock. The joy of success moved Ed Stafford to tears and a runny nose. Then he began squatting down to create fire through friction. However, for some unknown reason, even after drilling for 2.5 hours, not a single spark appeared. By the 6th day, the water storage device placed outside the door had almost become useless. Helplessly, he turned to coconuts again to replenish a small amount of water. He grabbed the wooden stick again and rubbed it non-stop. However, no matter which fire starting method he tried, the final result was always no progress at all. At this point, Ed Stafford truly felt the hardship of survival. Just like that, he made it through another night. Early in the morning, Ed Stafford picked up a wooden stick and went to crack open coconuts. However, due to days of dehydration and hunger, he couldn't even manage to complete this small task. Frustrated to the point of anger, Ed Stafford couldn't hold back anymore. All kinds of emotions erupted inside him at that moment. Because he had often eaten raw sea snails before, Ed Stafford suddenly began vomiting uncontrollably. By nightfall, his entire body was weak, fatigued, and uncomfortable. All he could think about was how to find a source of water. By the 9th day, he began to explore deeper into the island. Along the way, he discovered an old shirt. At night, when it got cold, it could be used as sleepwear. Today, he still only drank one coconut. The constant dry mouth and thirst put him at risk of dehydration, along with symptoms like headaches and nausea. To avoid losing his life while filming the show, in a moment of urgency, Ed Stafford opened the first aid kit and took 2 antibiotics. Time moved on to the 11th day. Ed Stafford, close to dying of thirst, finally reached a turning point. It had rained all night last night. The seashell containers had also filled up a large bottle of fresh water. As the sweet rainwater flowed down into his stomach, Ed Stafford immediately saw hope for survival once again. While exploring the island, he also discovered wild taro. This is a root vegetable that grows underground, rich in carbohydrates. Ed Stafford quickly dug up a big pile of them. Using a rusty piece of metal he found, he sliced them into thick pieces. Then he laid them out in the sun to dry. 2.5 hours later, he tasted a piece. The taste was crispy, sweet, and refreshing. Its calories were more than 10 times that of beef. Just eating vegetables without meat wouldn't do. To replenish protein, Ed Stafford used a plastic bottle to create a traditional fish trap. At the beach, he used snails as bait and quickly set it up in a tidal pool. In the afternoon, he went to check it, and unexpectedly, he actually caught a few small loaches. Unfortunately, there was still no campfire. Ed Stafford, starving and dry-throated, could only eat sashimi. He even ate the entire thing in one go, not even spitting out the bones. His body had now been replenished with energy. Ed Stafford began once again preparing to make fire. As a result, he spent an entire afternoon just to finish making the fire base. At this rate, creating fire still seemed like a distant goal. Time passed to the 13th day. Ed Stafford got ready to go all out drilling wood to make fire. Finally, after drilling for 3.5 hours, he was able to generate a small spark. With steady breaths blown into the tinder, it eventually caught fire. Incredible. It took nearly half a month just to light a fire. It was truly exhausting. Ed Stafford was so overwhelmed, he cried with joy. That's more like it. With a big fire now burning, Ed Stafford brewed himself a pot of hot tea. I've got tea to drink now. I finally have tea to drink. With a hot gulp of tea down his belly, he let out his signature laugh once again. As for lunch, he grilled a bit of coconut meat he had from earlier. Seeing that the situation had finally stabilized, Ed Stafford officially planned to build a house inland on the island. After all, staying in a cave long term wasn't exactly ideal. As for what happens next, let's wait and see. This thing is spraying out a white liquid. It kind of reminds me of my buddy Ed Stafford. Not sure if this thing is edible. As we all know, when Ed Stafford is hungry, he'll eat anything. He brought that unknown creature spraying white liquid back to the camp. He grilled it over a high flame for 2.5 minutes. Once the surface turned golden brown, it was ready to eat. Aside from being very hard to swallow, the protein content was definitely 50 times that of beef. At this point, Ed Stafford had survived 13 days on the deserted island. Today's mission was still to find enough fresh water. Based on elementary science learned in college, low-lying areas on the island would definitely gather water, so Ed Stafford went and lifted a large rock off the ground. Sure enough, there was a large puddle of muddy water underneath. He hurriedly filled up a bottle, didn't even filter it, and chugged it down. Just look at the color of that water. It probably contained half the periodic table. Ed Stafford chugged over 10 bottles in one go. In addition, a lot of lime leaves were growing around the area. As an old British man who loves tea, of course he had to gather some to take with him. Back at the camp, unexpectedly, the fire had almost gone out. Luckily, a few well-aimed breaths brought it back to life. To avoid such things from happening again, Ed Stafford quickly gathered a huge pile of dry firewood, stored it at the camp just in case he needed it later. By the 15th day, this morning's breakfast was considered a luxury. A big hot pot of crab provided much-needed protein. Ed Stafford began selecting a spot to build his shelter. He quickly found a flat piece of land in the forest. However, he didn't have any suitable tools, which meant even cutting a single branch took a lot of effort. After 2.5 hours of work, he finally managed to set up the roof beam. Just doing this alone already left Ed Stafford starving. He went to the beach and picked up 2 crabs, then returned to camp to enjoy lunch. At this snail's pace, the shelter might take another 1 or 2 months to complete. After resting for a while, Ed Stafford got back to work. The branches here were incredibly tough. Using seashells to cut them required repeated hacking and even jumping on them. Just that one tiny tree took him 3.5 hours, and he would need at least 10 of these small trees. The massive workload understandably left him feeling discouraged. damaged. Frustrated, he returned to camp and started drinking tea. A short 2.5-hour break. Midday temperatures had soared to 40 degrees. To protect his baby soft skin from the sun's rays, Ed Stafford smeared mud all over his little face, then wrapped a cloth around his head and went to the beach to collect supplies. He not only picked up a pile of useless plastic bottles, but also found an 8-armed toothbrush wedged between rocks. Judging by its scruffy look, it had likely been used by many people before. But for Ed Stafford, it meant he could finally clean his dentures. Continuing onward, he also found a rugby ball. Thinking about being all alone on the island, Ed Stafford named it Gilbert. At night, he used it as a pillow. That way, when he felt lonely, it could help soothe his heart. Another day flew by. Early in the morning, Ed Stafford crushed up charcoal, then began brushing his dentures with the toothbrush. With the way he was brushing, I was really afraid he'd knock out a front tooth. After finishing, he buried himself back in the forest to continue building his wild mansion. At this point, he still needed a support beam for the roof. However, due to prolonged malnutrition, he couldn't work long before needing to rest on the spot for an entire hour. His body constantly craved protein, so he went back to the beach to search for small fish or shrimp. Luckily, he discovered an eel beneath a rock. Now he could enjoy a hearty dinner that night. However, the next strange creature even left Ed Stafford, someone who's seen it all, completely astonished. This creature kept secreting a cloudy white fluid, even splattering some onto Ed Stafford. He didn't even care if it was safe to eat. As long as it was protein, it all got bagged and brought back. There was no other choice in these food scarce days. Everything was just that scarce. Back at the camp, he placed the creature he had picked up on the fire to grill. The delicious eel meal was ready first. This was the first time Ed Stafford had eaten meat since the start, half a month ago. No complaints about texture or flavor. Tender inside, crispy outside, with protein over 10 times that of beef. After the appetizer, the chubby creature was grilled till it burst. He couldn't wait, shoved it straight into his mouth. It felt like chewing on a burnt tire. The flavor wasn't very good at all. By nighttime, it suddenly started pouring rain. Ed Stafford, staying in the cave, looked surprised. Now he could finally drink clean water. The next day, he used a straw to begin collecting rainwater. He successfully filled 6 bottles of mineral water. Now he finally didn't have to worry about the water supply anymore. Ed Stafford even planned to divide the water evenly by day. That way, it could last longer. Although today the island's weather was being ravaged by strong winds, he still decided to try building the tent. What he was doing now was weaving palm leaves into a roof, then securing each piece onto the frame. Over the next few days, Ed Stafford kept repeating the same tasks. Aside from using seashells to chop wood, he just sat in one place weaving the roof. Very quickly, the previously collected water was completely used up. Helpless again, Ed Stafford turned to the coconuts on the trees. He also picked a type of bright green fruit while he was at it. Using a rock to smash it open, he saw there was quite a bit of pulp inside. However, after the first bite, the taste was sour and astringent, not good at all. After carefully tasting it for 2.5 minutes, Ed Stafford still decided to toss it. He turned around and went back to the spot where he had previously dug up wild taro. Just earlier in hunger, he had eaten 2 taro leaves, which led to his entire mouth tingling and his gums swelling in pain. This was not good news. If he got food poisoning, it could be very serious. By the next morning, Ed Stafford was completely drained. He woke up at midnight and went to the bathroom over 10 times. His body felt awful, but he pushed through the headache to finish the new shelter. Soon, it was halfway done. Along the way, wild mountain goats even showed up to supervise. On the way, he even encountered wild mountain goats coming to supervise the construction. These guys didn't seem to care about Ed Stafford at all. They boldly ate grass and pooped all around the tent. Seeing that, Ed Stafford grew anxious inside. If he had a tool in hand, he definitely would have caught one to improve his meals. Suddenly, a coconut crab came right to the door. It seemed not fully grown. He brought it to camp, grilled it, and ate it. Since he didn't know which parts were inedible, so Ed Stafford simply swallowed a whole piece. Just like that, time passed to the 24th day. Ed Stafford prepared some dry wood in advance for the shelter. But because the roof still wasn't finished, the move-in day had to be postponed once more. Due to being alone for such a long time, Ed Stafford's mental state also began to suffer. At this moment, he deeply longed for someone to talk to. Only those who've been through it would understand. The next morning, when Ed Stafford went out to gather firewood, he suddenly spotted a fishing boat. It was his first glimpse of human civilization since arriving on the island. Thinking about the delicious hamburgers on the boat, Ed Stafford nearly drooled onto the ground. Unfortunately, the challenge wasn't over yet, and he had to return to weaving the roof. However, seeing civilization again gave him a big boost in confidence. Even while working hungry, he could smile. But soon, things began to change. That day, Ed Stafford suddenly discovered wild taro nearby. He quickly dug up 7 or 8 in one go. For him, this was definitely 3 days worth of dry food. Finding food again gave him new hope for survival. So he returned to the old spot and gave it his all, chopping down the final small tree. With this support beam, he no longer had to worry about the roof collapsing. Time moved to the 28th day. After more than 2 weeks of hard work, Ed Stafford's wild mansion was finally completed. Looking at the neat and tidy palm leaf roof, overcome with emotion, Ed Stafford couldn't help but burst into song. Now he had a home to live in. On the 29th day, today was the perfect day to move. Ed Stafford finally picked up his suitcase and stepped out of the cave. For him, this wasn't just a simple move. It was a big step toward enjoying a relaxing life. Then he skillfully brewed himself a pot of hot tea. There's a beautiful lyric that says, "Tea brewed by Ed Stafford has a flavor called home." That line couldn't be more true. Sitting inside the tent, Ed Stafford felt a sense of family for the first time. He couldn't help but smile, a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. Time moved to the 30th day. Ed Stafford's life gradually settled into a rhythm. Every day, besides having enough coconuts and fresh water, he could occasionally find some protein washed up on the beach. But what fascinated him the most were the goat skewers walking freely around the island. If he could just catch one, it would be enough to last him until the challenge ended. So Ed Stafford spent a lot of time observing the goat's behavior. Finally, he decided to make a bow and arrows to hunt. Could Ed Stafford's goat meat dream come true easily? Let's wait and see. This is a key dramatic moment in the deserted island survival story. The famous scene of the goat hanging itself sparked a lot of controversy. With this 59-kilogram goat, Ed Stafford seemed to have turned survival into an actual vacation. Inside the house hung smoked goat meat everywhere. In his hands was a goat leg, crispy outside, tender inside. After eating his fill, he even traded dentures for mangoes. The outdoor hunting trip ended days of near starvation. Ed Stafford had now survived 1 month on the deserted island. This morning's breakfast was light, with no real appetite. To catch the wild mountain goats rampaging around the island, Ed Stafford began gathering materials to make a bow and arrow. First, he bent a flexible branch, then tied a string he'd found on the beach. He eagerly tested the result, but the arrow didn't fly straight at all. Looks like he'll need to come up with another plan. By the 37th day, today Ed Stafford caught 19 small crabs in one go. Together, they provided more than 3,000 calories, enough to fuel him for the entire day. But unexpectedly, his heirloom pot broke down right at this moment. The bottom had a huge hole, making it completely unusable, so Ed Stafford could only use a seashell to cook lunch. Look at this golden crab soup. Just one sip. Who knows how many times more protein than beef? Time passed to the 41st day. As soon as Ed Stafford woke up, he felt like he was 6 months pregnant. He even started farting continuously. According to him, it was probably from eating too many crabs. To relieve the symptoms, Ed Stafford began chewing charcoal. But not long after, his condition worsened. Relentless headaches and stomach cramps left him moaning on the ground. Oh my god, it felt even worse than childbirth. Unable to endure it any longer, Ed Stafford helplessly called for help. 2.5 hours later, a doctor finally arrived. He quickly checked Ed Stafford's heart rate and blood pressure, then tossed him 2 antibiotics and left in a hurry. By the 42nd day, Ed Stafford's health slightly improved. While out exploring, he happened to discover a drum of locally produced oil. He brought it back to camp and cut it in half using a rock. That easily gave him a large iron pot, perfect for stewing fish or meat. A few days earlier, he had also picked up an engine part near the reef. He carefully sharpened its surface and attached a wooden handle. That gave him a handmade ancient-style axe. Its sharpness was beyond doubt. Cutting wood was as easy as slicing vegetables. About 2 weeks ago, Ed Stafford had started planting wild taro on the island. By now, many plants had already sprouted. As for tonight's dinner, he dug up a taro root, sliced it thin, and cooked it in the pot. Another good day passed quickly. The next morning, Ed Stafford took a walk and unexpectedly scored a huge find. It was a huge surprise to discover a giant coconut crab on the ground. Oh my gosh, the size of this thing is absolutely insane. High-quality ingredients are usually cooked with the simplest methods. He brought it back to camp and threw it straight onto the fire to grill. No additions like dill or chili at all. Very quickly, Ed Stafford got to enjoy a delicious meal. First, he broke off one big strong claw. Look at this crab meat, bigger than a fist. Ed Stafford lay on the ground, happily gnawing away. He quickly finished off the entire lunch. After his body was recharged with energy, he began upgrading his arrow. Using palm leaves he picked up to make feather fletching, he split them and tied them to the back of the wooden stick. Very quickly, he had an arrow with wings. He went to the beach to test it out. Unexpectedly, the range was quite good. Not letting his guard down, Ed Stafford brought his gear to the forest. But whether it was due to his poor skills or the goats being too clever, he chased their tails and fired all day, but unsurprisingly still came back empty-handed. Watching their arrogant silhouettes, Ed Stafford decided to regain his strength before hunting again. By the 44th day, Ed Stafford planned to make a water storage system for the camp, using a red-hot metal piece to slice a plastic pipe he had found, then attaching a section of bamboo to the edge of the roof. Together with the pipe, it could collect rainwater into plastic bottles. That way, no more worrying about rainwater going to waste. Speak of the devil. 2.5 hours later, it really started pouring down, and the water storage system worked exactly as expected. Now he didn't have to run to the beach and catch drinking water with a seashell. However, just as Ed Stafford was habitually searching for materials along the shore, he suddenly discovered a male goat with its head stuck in the branches by the water. At that moment, its head was tightly trapped in the tree limbs. Faced with this protein feast delivered right to his doorstep, Ed Stafford's eyes lit up like headlights. The goat, too, was startled and trembled at the sight of his bald head. To save the animal from unnecessary suffering, Ed Stafford quickly used a rock to end its entrapment. With this fat goat weighing dozens of kilos, he could easily stay another half month on the island. Thinking of that, Ed Stafford couldn't help but laugh out loud. Wonderful. He then brought the goat back to camp and began processing the body with a homemade blade. Look at this plump tenderloin. With a bizarre laugh, Ed Stafford looked like he had found paradise. He stayed busy from noon till night. Ed Stafford was exhausted and out of breath. But thinking about the rich goat meat feast ahead, all the fatigue instantly disappeared. He couldn't wait, so he first put the goat's eggs and liver into the pot to cook. Once the dish was perfectly cooked, Ed Stafford took a bite and exclaimed at how delicious it was. There was also a big pot full to the brim. He ate and drank his fill, then slept happily. The next morning came. Seeing the smoked goat meat pieces hanging all over the roof, Ed Stafford decided to first cook a rich, fatty goat leg. As for the method, he dug a deep hole in the ground, then roasted it over high heat for 3.5 hours. Finally, he stewed the goat leg inside. Palm leaves were placed on top to cover it. Could this be the legendary beggar's goat leg dish? After waiting a full 4 hours, Ed Stafford couldn't wait any longer and lifted the leaves. Immediately, the aroma of roasted goat meat hit his nose. After a long hunger, he finally ate well. He laughed while enjoying the dish, feeling extremely satisfied with the flavor. The protein content was at least 100 times that of beef. After eating and drinking enough, Ed Stafford sat on the beach watching the sunset. This was how normal people should live. By the 47th day, Ed Stafford washed the goat hide he had skinned, then stretched it out on a wooden frame to dry. He used a rock to smooth the surface. And just like that, he had a handmade goatskin vest. Paired with his freshly grown goatee, Ed Stafford was now a trendsetter in survival fashion. To truly eat something different with every meal, he returned to where he had dumped the goat's internal organs. Seeing the swarm of fly larvae crawling on top, Ed Stafford tissed, looked aside, and filled a bottle, then poured all the larvae into a small puddle. Next, he built a stone wall at the entrance of the puddle. Now he just needed to wait for some greedy fish to bite. On his way back, he also picked some coconuts from the tree to add a bit of water. He couldn't wait and rushed to check the trap. Unexpectedly, he had successfully caught a small saltwater fish. He sliced it thin and put it into a pot to make soup, though there weren't any seasonings at all. Being able to drink fresh fish soup in this situation made Ed Stafford so satisfied he couldn't stop smiling. Seeing how everything had been going smoothly, it made Ed Stafford start to fantasize. So in the following days, he began building a wooden raft. He planned to go out to the faraway coral reef to catch fish. Very quickly, all the dried goat meat at home had been eaten, so now was the time to start looking for other types of food. The next morning, Ed Stafford rowed the raft out into the water. Unfortunately, the waves and wind were too strong that day. After half a day of drifting and rowing, he had moved just around 2.5 meters. The seawater even pushed the raft farther and farther away. Seeing that this method clearly wouldn't work, helplessly, Ed Stafford had to give up on heading offshore to catch fish. In a blink, he was back on the mountain searching for edible plants. He accidentally discovered a young taro plant. He didn't think a few plants would yield so many tubers. With minimal digging, he got up to 12. Seems like starch won't be a problem for a while. Time passed to the 57th day. With a better quality of life, Ed Stafford started working out. But the most luxurious indulgence in the wild was still making a soft and comfortable single bed. After finishing it, Ed Stafford happily lay down. No matter how tired he was, it all faded away in that moment. While out for a walk, he also discovered a mango tree. Judging by its bright green appearance, it clearly wasn't ripe yet. But Ed Stafford didn't care about that. He picked one and immediately started devouring it. However, because he bit down too hard, he accidentally knocked out his fake front tooth. Seeing this moment of trading a denture for a mango, all he could say was, legendary. Dinner was even more extravagant, a bowl of mixed seafood and ocean crab. At this point, Ed Stafford was no longer just trying to survive. Judging by his demeanor, living here another year wouldn't be a problem. In a blink, the day of return had finally arrived. Ed Stafford grinned ear to ear, smiling like a goof. 60 days of life on the deserted island had left his hair and beard long and wild. After saying goodbye to the tiny shelter that had kept him company for 2 months, he cheerfully carried his gear to the shore. Accompanied by the roar of the engine, a helicopter quickly approached. After greeting the pilot, the man tried to endure Ed's breath and floored the gas pedal. The 60-day deserted island survival challenge ended in success.